I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.
Hello there, Price of Reason here with a movie review. In 2015, amidst the growing popularity of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Ant-Man 1 was released, starring Paul Rudd, Michael Douglas, and Evangeline Lilly. Prior to that first movie's release, even though many people, myself included, had initially considered Ant-Man a rather silly, low-tier Marvel superhero, it ended up being a pretty enjoyable popcorn movie. One of the things that made the first movie successful was its ability to combine Paul Rudd's likability, charm, and humor with Michael Douglas's more serious acting skills as a straight man. This, along with solid supporting performances from Michael Pena and Evangeline Lilly, made the movie fun and breezy to watch. While not exactly a franchise best for the MCU, it was also far from being a franchise worst. Its follow-up movie, Ant-Man and the Wasp, seemingly continued the spirit of the first movie, but with one key difference. This second movie made Evangeline Lilly's Wasp a more central character, and while I don't generally dislike her or the character, that movie also made Ant-Man himself seem like a less competent side character in his own movie. This is something that I did have an issue with, and it would become part of a bigger problem we've seen in the MCU in recent years. Still, while I liked the second movie significantly less than the first, it was at least somewhat watchable, I guess. When the third Ant-Man movie, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, was announced a few years back, I wasn't sure what creative direction the Ant-Man series would go in, and when it was announced that it would feature Kang inside the quantum realm, I was a bit surprised, as it seemed like an odd creative direction for Ant-Man. When I saw the first Ant-Man Quantumania trailer last month, I had expressed some real concerns about the movie, and now that I've seen the movie, I think that I can say that I was mostly right. In this video, I'm going to go over the plot of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, what I liked about it, what I didn't like, talk about the movie's messaging, and then share my thoughts about the overall current creative direction of the MCU. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania starts with a pre-credit flashback scene where we see Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne stuck with Kang in what appears to be the quantum realm, where she herself was stuck for 30 years prior to the events of her rescue in Ant-Man 2. For those that have lost interest in the MCU or simply don't watch the MCU on Disney+, Kang was introduced in the Season 1 finale of the rather stinky and disappointing MCU series, Loki. Anyhow, after the flashback, the movie then jumps forward to some time after the events of Avengers Endgame. As an Avengers member that helped take down Thanos, Scott Lang, aka Antman, is now a successful author and a well-liked member of the community. His girlfriend, Hope Van Dyne, aka The Wasp, is now the CEO of Hank Pym's company, and they both attend fancy events together as some type of celebrity power couple. But not all is perfect, as Scott's daughter Cassie, now a rebellious teenager, has been arrested for being an anti-police activist, so he has to bail her out. Cassie also wants to continue in her father's footsteps, so she's been working on her own Ant-Man suit and doing experiments with the quantum realm. While Scott, Hope, and Cassie visit Hope's parents Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne for dinner, Cassie wants to show them all a breakthrough that she's had. It turns out that she's found a way to communicate with the quantum realm. How is this young woman capable of doing everything better than people with massive resources and years of experience?
Hey, relax, guy, trust me.
At this point, Janet tells Cassie to stop the communication because it's too dangerous, but it's too late. Cassie's message already causes a portal to open up, and they all get sucked into the quantum realm. In order to accommodate the movie's screenplay, Scott and Cassie Lang inexplicably end up in one area of the quantum realm, while Hank, Janet, and Hope end up in another. Scott and Cassie encounter a strange and quirky group of rebels led by a woman with big muscles. Hope, Hank, and Janet encounter Bill Murray, and while he's technically supposed to be portraying a character in the movie, he just acts like Bill Murray, so that's what I'm gonna call him. Anyhow, it turns out that Janet and Bill Murray used to have a fling years ago in the quantum realm when they were fighting Kang. Unbeknownst to Janet though, Bill Murray now works for Kang, so he's alerted his army of her arrival. This means Hope, Hank, and Janet are in trouble, so they steal a spaceship and leave. It's at this point that Janet confesses that years ago she helped a stranded Kang fix his spaceship's core, but when she realized that he was going to kill trillions of people by traveling to different universes, she sabotaged his core by enlarging it with Pym particles. Now, apparently, the only way to fix this core is to shrink it back with Pym particles, which Scott and Cassie have in their possession. Conveniently, Kang somehow knows this, so he sends his robot army to confront the rebels, led by Darren from Ant-Man 1, who is now known as MODOK. Apparently, Darren got sucked into the quantum realm in Ant-Man 1 and ended up looking like a strange CGI brain with a little body. So while the rebels suffer a major blow, Kang manages to capture Lang and Cassie and put them in a jail cell. After Kang threatens to kill Cassie, Scott agrees to go fix his ship's core and bring it to him. That's when Scott arrives at a place called the Realm of Possibility, where he splits up into multiple versions of Scott Lang that all argue with each other. At the end, Hope shows up as the Wasp and saves him. They then use Pym particles to shrink the core, and now they take it back to Kang. In a twist that everybody saw coming, Kang reneges on their deal, captures Janet and destroys the ship that Hank Pym is on. Scott and Hope then learn that Hank Pym is still alive because his aunt saved him and because he loves socialism. Yeah, we'll get back to that later. Though Cassie somehow breaks out of her cell and then rescues the big, muscle woman rebel leader, she also turns MODOK into a good guy and then he dies trying to save Scott. Scott and the rebels attack Kang and his robots. Then there's a showdown between Kang and Scott during which a portal opens up and everybody goes back to the regular Earth universe. Everybody except for Scott, that is, who is essentially sacrificing himself by keeping Kang from entering the portal. In a final battle between the two, Kang seems to have the upper hand, and just as he's about to kill Scott, Hope shows up through a portal, kills Kang, and saves Scott. Again! Didn't Scott sacrifice his own life to make sure that Kang doesn't enter the real world? By reopening the portal to save Scott, weren't the people he just saved basically risking the destruction of the entire universe? What if Kang had already killed Scott, and now he just needed the portal to open up so that he could go destroy the universe?
Hey, don't worry about that. Take a load off. Don't think about it. Look over here.
Scott then walks around town thinking about Kang warning him about an upcoming crisis that will destroy the Earth, but then he brushes it off and celebrates Cassie's birthday, and then the movie ends. In a first post-credit scene, a bunch of Kang variants get together and plan to destroy the multiverse. Then in another post-credit scene, Loki and Owen Wilson are watching a Kang variant called Victor Timely perform on a stage during the 1920s. And that's the end of the movie. As always, I will start with what I liked about the movie, even though there really wasn't much to like. Number 1, the cast. While I do have many issues with the movie, the cast was overall solid. Michael Douglas and Michelle Pfeiffer are iconic veteran actors, and no matter what material you give them, their delivery is always great. For me, their acting is the strongest in this movie, too. As for Paul Rudd, I think he does the best with the material that he was given, but I also think that the movie doesn't really play to his strengths, which is something that I will talk about shortly. Evangeline Lilly is okay as Hope as usual. The little girl that plays Cassie is decent. Jonathan Majors is serviceable enough as Kang, although time will tell if he really is the best casting for all the different variants of Kang. As for Bill Murray, he's in this movie for one scene, and while it's nice to see him there doing his classic Bill Murray routine, it doesn't really leave some big impact on the movie itself. With that being said, I think I would have rather seen a movie where Bill Murray walks around the quantum realm for 2 hours and just does some improv there. It probably would have been a better movie, too. Number 2, opening and closing scenes. The opening and closing scenes have Scott narrating developments in his life and walking around the streets. For me, those are probably the only truly good scenes in the movie. Well, that was the good. Now let's talk about the bad. Number 1, the writing. I don't know what it is with Kevin Feige these days, but he just keeps hiring such poor writers that lack the right experience for comic book movies. In this case, the writer of Ant-Man is Jeff Loveness, a guy whose claim to fame is that he once wrote jokes for Jimmy Kimmel, and that he also wrote some of Rick and Morty's less popular episodes. You could tell very quickly that the guy is out of his element here because there's really nothing driving the overall story in his script. Things just seem to conveniently happen as the movie lazily shifts from one scene to another, and the characters clinically move from point A to point B. There's never really a feeling of suspense, wonder, adventure, or even any type of emotional journey. This is because there never seems to be a steady writing hand here in control of the overall narrative. The dialogue isn't particularly snappy, funny, or interesting either. At times, this movie feels like it has the writing level of a low-level CW TV show and not some big-budget MCU movie. But the absolute biggest sin this movie commits is that it's boring as f***. I mean, I wasn't tired walking into the theater, but halfway through the movie, I had to keep myself from nodding off, and that's never a good sign. Number 2, the tone. Ant-Man 1 and 2 had a more lighthearted tone, and I think it was a perfect fit for Paul Rudd's more humorous style. This movie wanted to utilize Rudd for a more serious movie, and for me, it doesn't really work. Not that he can't pull it off as an actor, he's good enough to do it, but it just feels like a waste, and also not in line with the Ant-Man character as we know him. The opening and closing scenes, which I suspect may have been done in reshoots, are the only ones that really let Paul Rudd be the more lighthearted character that we're familiar with. That's why they're the only scenes that really stand out in the movie. Also, the first two Ant-Man movies were set in a real-world setting. The idea of Scott shrinking and enlarging himself and other objects within the real world was amusing and a key aspect of what made those movies unique. Once he's in the quantum realm, though, where everything is already bizarre and unconventional, there really isn't a clear definition of time and space anymore. So when he grows and shrinks, it almost has no real significance and the movie loses a big part of its identity and charm. Also, while the existing cast in this movie is actually quite good, dropping Michael Pena from the cast gives Paul Rudd far less options to bounce his humor off of, and in my opinion, this one decision actually hurts the tone of the movie. Number 3, Quantum Realm. Another issue with the whole idea of the quantum realm is that I feel like it needed more world building for us to buy into. Once there's a brand new world being shown, and it just seems random and all over the place, you don't really know who's going where and why. Even if the characters are telling you, it still doesn't fully register. It just ends up feeling like one long, never-ending scene showcasing a bunch of random CGI visuals. Number 4, green screen. Similarly to most of the shows these days on Disney+, as well as the recent Doctor Strange 2 movie, there's just too much use of green screen and CGI in this movie. At some point, this lowers the stake and just causes the movie to look more like a video game. I also feel like in some cases, the VFX crew seems overwhelmed with so much work, and some parts of the movie end up feeling rushed, cheap, incomplete, or all of the above. Number 5, MCU connectivity. One of the good things about Ant-Man 1 and to a lesser extent Ant-Man 2 was that those movies could be part of the MCU franchise, but they could also function as part of a standalone series. Now when you watch this movie, if you haven't watched the Stinky Loki series on Disney+, you may not even understand what you're looking at. Same issue we had with the crappy Doctor Strange 2 movie and WandaVision. And Kang being a part of this movie in order to connect the movie with a bigger MCU narrative feels forced and out of place. For example, in order to fit Kang into this movie where he didn't really belong, they had to retcon Janet's time within the quantum realm to include her past interaction with him. But this forced interaction doesn't perfectly fit with past or current events. If Janet knew that nobody should ever again communicate with the quantum realm because it could destroy her entire universe and kill trillions of people, wouldn't she say something about it? I mean, I suppose the screenwriter tries to solve this by having her say that she was too ashamed to tell them about Kang, but that's not a solution. Janet never had to tell them all the details about Kang. She could have just given them a general warning not to communicate with the quantum realm. If so many lives were on the line here, and she decided to keep it a secret, it only makes her character look selfish and dumb, which is actually a writing mistake. Another mistake was trying to make Darren from Ant-Man 1 the new MODOK. MODOK is a separate character within the Marvel source material, and I don't think he fits here at all. I also didn't like the way he looked visually, as it looked rather cheap. I understand that they wanted him to be more of a comic relief character like in Iron Man the animated series, but I would have preferred to see a more comic book accurate version of MODOK instead. But honestly, I would have just deleted that whole MODOK idea from this Ant-Man script altogether, as it didn't really organically belong here anyways. It's another case of trying to force MCU connectivity all the time with so many characters, when sometimes it's best to just have a more personal and less interconnected story. Let the different series within the franchise breathe, and only then build up a bigger, connected story again, more gradually and organically, just like they did during the successful Infinity Saga. It seems like Kevin Feige just wants to keep cashing in on these big event movies, but he's not willing to put in the time and work like he did in the past to build them up, which is at least one of the reasons why all the recent MCU projects have dipped so much in quality. If you ask me, they need to go back to movies like Iron Man 1, Captain America 1, or even Ant-Man 1 to tell more isolated and personal stories, and only then to build up a new, bigger story. Number 6. Gender messaging. In recent years, Disney, for whatever reason, have become obsessed not only with identity politics as a whole, but specifically gender messaging with a focus on a smash the patriarchy agenda. As a result, every movie of theirs that comes out these days has to push this same idea that there are no differences between men and women whatsoever. Not in personality, not biologically, not physically. And in order to prove their point, which is actually false, they've become so desperate to not only have women act like men in every movie, but to also have women look like men too. Just recently, we had Taskman in Black Widow, a movie in which Marvel secretly pasted a woman's face over a man's body using CGI so that the viewers would think that men and women were physically equal. In Thor: Love and Thunder, Disney's overworked VFX people had to secretly make 20-pound Natalie Portman look like a muscle man using CGI, and all this happened after Chris Hemsworth worked out every day for many hours in order to get shape for the same movie. No secret CGI muscles there. In Ant-Man 3, Disney's Marvel used two characters to push their now standard gender messaging. The first one is Evangeline Lilly's Hope, aka the Wasp. If she looked strange to you in this movie, it's because they gave her a little boy's haircut so that she would look like, well, a little boy. In addition, in the two key moments in the movie where Scott has to do something important, she of course has to step in, save him, and save the day because he just isn't good enough. This is especially noticeable in the scene that Scott battles Kang at the end. Now I'm paraphrasing, but earlier in the movie, Kang tells Scott that he doesn't have what it takes to go up against him because he's not in his league or something along those lines. This is after Kang threatens to kill Scott's daughter. Generally, even from a writing perspective, after this type of threat and setup, you'd expect Scott himself to teach Kang a real lesson by the end of the movie and take him out personally. It would also be a great heroic moment to show how Scott steps up when somebody threatens his family. Instead, Kang almost kills Scott, and he's only saved at the last minute by Hope, aka the Wasp, because she's more man than Scott is. Another character they have to push their gender messaging through is Gentura, leader of the rebellion. Now, to be fair, in this case, they did cast a female bodybuilder with actual muscles, so it wasn't CGI, and I have to say that the actress did fine and didn't bother me at all. In fact, if we didn't recently have so many other MCU instances of this specific female body build, CGI or not, it wouldn't stand out as much to me. But since this seemingly has to happen in every single MCU movie these days, to me it feels like Disney is desperately trying to present this as an ideal body type for women, when in fact, very few women can actually achieve it or would even want to. Another reason they do all these gender games is that apparently they want to combat the male gaze, which is an annoying double standard because they don't seem to have any problem with the female gaze. Women can look at appealing men like Chris Hemsworth all they want, but men aren't allowed to look at appealing women on screen anymore. This brings me to the only real female silver lining in this movie, and quite possibly the MVP of this entire movie, Michelle Pfeiffer. You see, with the clothes and hair that were chosen for her, it seems like the producers of Ant-Man 3 wanted Michelle Pfeiffer's character to look like an old hag, but in her case, their agenda completely failed. That's because Michelle Pfeiffer, even today, looks too good to be presented that way. As a result, Pfeiffer ends up being the most appealing woman in this film, and I say this with no irony and no cynicism. Despite this stinky movie's best efforts, Michelle Pfeiffer still looks great, and that's a fact. Number 7, political messaging. It really annoys me that I have to talk about this because overall, I don't consider myself a very political person, and this channel isn't actually a political one either. I generally don't care who people voted for or why, and I consider myself a middle-of-the-road independent thinker. With that being said, there are things that happen in this movie as well as other recent MCU projects that simply can't be ignored. For starters, there seems to be a strong anti-police sentiment, and it seems like a strange message to keep sending kids. While there have always been tropes in TV and cinema where cops are ridiculed or sometimes presented in a negative light, it's usually been more humorous and less malicious, especially in programming aimed for children. Not anymore, though. In Falcon and Winter Soldier, cops hassle Sam for no reason. In Wakanda Forever, Shuri, Okoye, and Riri are seemingly responsible for the deaths of several police officers just trying to do their jobs, and nobody even mentions it. In Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, once again there's a showdown with police just trying to do their jobs, and while I admit that in that case, it's significantly more lighthearted, it's still there. Then, in Ant-Man 3, Scott's daughter is basically going to some anti-police rally where she gets arrested. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the police are perfect or that they never make mistakes, and I understand that over the past few years this has been a hot topic issue. Still, are MCU movies really the right place to take hard positions on such matters? MCU movies shouldn't be the home for peddling blunt force propaganda of this nature. We already have cable news networks for that. Also, however you may feel about the police, I think that having them is still a necessity for keeping law and order, even within an imperfect system. Let me give you a real-world example. If Marvel president Kevin Feige woke up tomorrow and his Lamborghini was stolen, who do you think he would call? That's right, the police. And that's just one example. But in the context of Ant-Man 3, it actually gets worse. The reason Cassie is protesting is because she's trying to help, quote-unquote, homeless people. And I say quote-unquote because these are people that actually tried to steal other people's property between Thanos' snap and the blip. So technically, they're not really homeless people at all, but rather thieves. So it's basically people who feel they are entitled to something, even though they didn't work for it. And they're presented as the good guys, while the police, who are just trying to enforce the law, are supposed to be the bad guys. And if you think this type of messaging sounds awfully political, I hope you're sitting down, because it gets even worse. Much worse. Throughout the movie, Cassie complains to Scott that he no longer helps the little guy and tells him real-world slogans about discrimination and privilege such as, "Just because it's not happening to you, it doesn't mean that it's not happening." Later, when the rebels attack, I believe they also yell, "Burn it all down," too. To sum it up, think about all of the public discourse you've seen in recent years, especially during the summer of 2020, and it's all presented here from one very specific angle in a barely hidden way. But let's just say that I could let all of this messaging slide. There's a moment in this film where this type of blunt messaging turns into a PSA lecture. After the ants rescue him from death, two-time Academy Award winner Michael Douglas tells Scott that although some people say socialism is a bad word, the ants have proven that it's actually good. Or something along those lines. And when he delivers the sentence, it almost feels like he's breaking the fourth wall with a message that's clearly aimed at the kids watching the movie. To me, this is where I draw the line. This movie was supposed to be an escapist, fun, comic book adventure, not a political lecture, and I don't care what your politics are. Nobody voted Disney into office or asked them to lecture kids about their preferred political or gender ideologies. And it's not a one-off either. Whether in MCU movie releases or shows on Disney+, every project seems to get more and more political. And the worst part is, regardless of their messaging, most of these movies and TV shows are just poorly written with very poor storytelling, so they can't even claim that they're entertaining. We're effectively now just watching green screen PSAs and nothing more. And what exactly does Marvel president Kevin Feige want here? Under his supervision, all of his recent projects keep suggesting that men are bad, especially Caucasian ones, police are bad, law and order is bad, capitalism is bad, socialism is good, and women have to look and act like men. I mean, this is very hypocritical messaging coming from a middle-aged Caucasian male that recently bought a house for $52 million while working for a capitalist company like Disney. If Kevin Feige likes socialism so much, why doesn't he sell his home and donate the money to the poor? Or better yet, why doesn't he just donate all of his money to the thousands of employees that Disney has just laid off? Doesn't Kevin Feige care about the little guy? I mean, the fact that poverty isn't happening to Kevin Feige doesn't mean that it's not happening, right? Also, I searched online and tried to find pictures of Kevin Feige hanging out with women with big muscles, and I just couldn't seem to find any. But you know what I did find? A lot of pictures of Kevin Feige hanging out with appealing women. Very appealing women. And curiously, he also seems very happy in some of these pictures too, for some reason. If you ask me, I think that much like Star Wars, the damage to the MCU may be irreversible at this point. And I think it's probably time for Feige to step down and let somebody hungrier and less political take over his role as Marvel president. This would probably be good for MCU fans and quite honestly, for Kevin Feige himself. I mean, with a net worth of $250 million, at this point, Kevin Feige can quietly ride his Lamborghini into the sunset and go lobby for socialism. What did you think of Antman and the Wasp Quantumania? Did you love it? Feel free to let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and also clicking on that wonderful notification bell. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.